I need a title. So the title from Dr. Deming's book, The New Economics. Alan, can you get them to turn that sound down? Title is it's a long quote from Dr. Deming of The New Economics, and the quote begins with, "What if we preserved?" And it's a number of things, and at the end of the quote is the power of curiosity. And I found the quote by searching on Kindle out of the crisis, and there was no reference to the word curiosity. But it shows up once in The New Economics. I thought, that's all I need is one. I just need is one. So, yeah, this is a long quote. Okay, so it was 1993 book, The New Economics. Deming described a list of activities individuals face beginning at birth. Like, why not before? Which squeeze out from an individual over his lifetime his innate, not her, his intrinsic motivation, self-esteem, dignity. He labeled these activities the forces of destruction and attributed them to what he termed the prevailing system of management. Present-day management systems inspired by past systems and their foundation in scientific management. See, if you use the word science, it's automatically important. And that was Frederick Taylor, 1904 timeframe, who was known around the world. He was more well-known in his time than Deming. He was essentially the first management consultant ever. Congress knew about him. I mean, Congress knew about Deming. But anyway, but Taylor's a big name. They function with an emphasis on managing the parts of a system taken separately, leading to blame of what he termed willing workers for poor quality. While the management of parts surely has its utility, what happens when we become more and more aware of when, where, and how we are managing parts, and when, where, and how we are managing the parts of a greater system? Oh, what's going on here? Those aren't advancing, so I'm on the wrong version here. Okay. There, so you can follow along. Might it also lead to a rebirth of curiosity? So I divided it into these 4 parts: opening remarks, the red bead experiment, cue to Ellen.
Second what?
A cue to Ellen to hand out.
Red bead.
Yeah, hand out those kits. Yeah, go ahead and hand those out.
You want to do it now?
Yeah. Just this is not enough for everyone. I just carry it up, but we have enough for everyone downstairs because Ellen sent us 50 copies, 50 sets. And so there's a big box downstairs in which we'll give each of you one. Yeah, that's what I told Alan. Not the regular. We have executives coming to this. Give us the premier edition. And
without one.
So again, we have enough for everyone to walk away from the forum with one of those. Thanks, Alan.
I don't get to borrow yours.
This is the executive edition. If you want the willing worker edition, I got that one.
It'll stop and think when I need it that most executives wouldn't get it.
And for those who don't know, Alan Pippinger here, a sponsor of the forum, sells red bead kits. How many do you sell a year? 200?
200 a year.
Yeah.
I've sold 1,000 since I started.
And he's the best price in town,
Yeah.
right?
These are not available on Amazon yet. They will be in. I'm having the website redone. They will sell for $25, and the large one is $100.
I thought it was 99.
Inflation.
Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about the red bead experiment, the agony of the last straw, and then beyond the red beads. Okay. So here's me and Dr. Taguchi wearing an In2 InThinking Network cap at his 80th birthday. Me giving him an In2 t-shirt or polo shirt and a bag. And me meeting Dr. Deming in 1990. Dr. Deming would say, "Why are we here?" And this comes from his next to his last seminar. A friend got the original view foil that Deming wrote on. Why are we here? To learn to have fun and to make a difference. That was in Pasadena. Deming's 14 points for management. And so I worked for the Deming Institute for 18 months. And I believe the 14 Points website is like the most heavily visited website for the Deming Institute. Create consciously of purpose, adopt a new philosophy, cease dependence on inspection, which caused companies to get rid of inspectors because they didn't understand. He said, cease, not eliminate. End the practice of awarding business on price tag, improve constantly forever, institute training, institute leadership, drive out fear, break down barriers between departments, eliminate slogans. I remember in the training room that I had at Rocketdyne, we had posters around the room. And the room was not quite this size. It was easily almost this size. And there's a petition in the middle. And they were adjoining rooms used as conference rooms. And training rooms, for some reason, were being eliminated, and I didn't have a training room. But the president was my boss. So Tim and I looked around and found these two rooms were hardly used. So I went to my boss and said, we're going to take those rooms. And he said, go right ahead. And at the first In2 forum, we had 20 by 30 posters of all these statements on leadership all around the room. I remember one of them in class said, well, that's a slogan. That's a slogan. That's a slogan. I said, no, the intent, I mean, whether the sign is a slogan or not has to do with the understanding of the system and why it's there. That's a slogan. I said, so throw that out. Still sticks with me. I know who it was too. That's a slogan. All right, remove barriers that rob the hourly worker of right to pride of workmanship, insert a vigorous training program of education and self-improvement, put everybody together. Okay, and improve constantly forever the system of production. We'll look at the implications of that, and then drive out fear. So forces of destruction. This, I think, is figure 10 for the new economics. And Deming says, one is born with intrinsic motivation, self-esteem, cooperation, curiosity, joy, and learning. Attributes are high at the beginning of life and then decrease. And he says, forced distribution of grades in school, gold stars, may start sooner than that. And as with what Monica and I have watched with Wilson and Allison is she started implementing forces of destruction on him early on, banning, and Monica still regrets that she allowed him not to let him into her bedroom. Stay out. So the forces of destruction don't start necessarily at school, start at home. Merit system, judge people, put them into slots, competition between people, groups, divisions, incentive pay, pay for performance, numerical goals without a method, explanation of variances. We'll look at that. And sub-optimization, every group, every division, a profit center. These forces cause humiliation, fear, self-defense, competition for gold star, high grade, high rating from the job. They can lead anyone to play to win, not for fun. They crush out joy in learning, joy in the job, innovation, extrinsic motivation gradually replaces intrinsic motivation. So when I saw Deming speak in 1990, February, so about an hour from where I worked, when Monica and I were in Connecticut, and I was 3 years into studying Taguchi, and I saw this was before email. I saw maybe on a bulletin board Deming speaking at Western Connecticut University. So I went with 2 college friends who were not employed at the time. We met halfway, and saw him speak 3 times that day. And most of what he said had bore a little resemblance to what I knew from Taguchi. So it was like, what do I do with this? What do I do with that? You know, common causes and special causes. Taguchi doesn't talk that way. He spoke for an hour to the faculty, an hour to the students, an hour and a half for the public. And I know the professor. I got to know the professor who invited him. So I've got copies of 2 of those presentations. And then the following weekend, went to my hometown where 2 of the friends from college were there, and another one came down. So we were talking. And the one who wasn't at the Deming event was an MBA student. The rest of us were studying engineering. So he says, and he knew about Deming. His name was Phil. He knew about Deming. So he said, so what'd you learn? I said, he doesn't like competition. That's the only thing that stuck with me. He doesn't like competition. And he says, what's wrong with competition? I said, and that's what was bugging me. From Tuesday to Saturday was bugging me. But what I told Phil was, I said, we went through undergraduate, graduate, 2 or 3 of us had PhDs, MBA. I remember saying to Phil, maybe we don't mind competition because we did okay. These are RPI people, as Rob is. Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, upstate New York. And that's what was bugging me is about this competition thing. I'd never heard anyone before Deming speak ill of competition, not competition between Ford and GM, but competition within an organization. And so when Phil says, what's wrong with competition? I literally said, we did okay. We liked it. But what I flashed back to is the summer of my junior year. I came home from RPI. I went to community college where Shane went, Orange County Community College. And then the next summer is my first summer back from RPI. And I went to my father's gas station. And the first thing he said when I got out of the car was, he says, you ain't working here this summer. You better go find yourself a job. Something I said in the spring pissed him off. And my mother had died a year before, so she wasn't there to defend me. So he says, you ain't working here. So I immediately thought of a guy who came in, president of an extrusion company, who liked me. And I'll just go talk to him. So I went in, asked to speak to him, spoke with him. He directed me to the plant manager, and they hired me to start the next day. And I say that because there were people in that factory I went to elementary school with. And so I flashed back to them. How did they do relative to competition? They're working in this sweatshop. Now, and which is not to, look down on people, but that's what was bugging me was they were in the sweatshop. I'm playing summer softball at RPI and getting paid $7 an hour as a PhD student. And that piece was one of the first things that was bugging me after what Deming said. All right. So the accompanying figure shows, and this is straight out of New Economics. They build into him fear, self-defense, extrinsic motivation. We have been destroying our people from toddlers through university and on the job. We must preserve the power of intrinsic motivation. On and on. The transformation set forth in this book year by year helps build up the bottom half of the diagram and shrink the upper half. All right. So influencers, the three of them, and the third one is okay. So this is Deming and Akoff. They met for 3 hours or so in '92. You can download the transcript. It's like 50 pages, and those 50 pages got condensed to a 30-minute video. And in there, Russ, who was here in 2005 and 2006. He said the characteristic way of management that we have taught in the Western world is to take a complex system, divide it into parts, manage each part as well as possible. And if that's done, the system. And so I would typically, if I'm doing a Cal State Northridge class or work with Jeroen in the Netherlands, say to people, how would you complete this? How would you complete this? And there's almost a 50-50 split between things will be awful and that'll be okay. I said, well, he said the system will behave well. But he also said, and that's absolutely false. All right. And then Russ says, a system is not the sum of its parts, it's a product of interactions. The art of managing interactions is very different than the management of actions history requires us. And so this is Frederick Taylor. Management is the art of knowing what you want to do and seeing that they right, do it in the best and cheapest manner. Peter Drucker, management is a multi-purpose organ that manages a business and manages managers and manages workers and work. And then my proposal is management is the activity of allocating an organization's resources, ideas, finances, equipment, materials, tools, and techniques as guided by concepts and strategies. And so there's inputs that can convert into outputs, resources get converted into products and services, using tools and techniques. So tools are the implements, like a cell phone is a tool, computer is a tool, that are used to complete tasks, and techniques are how we use them. What I find is there's certain management concepts where people can't complete a sentence without using the word tool. It's all about tools. And I find out I love tools, but what's missing is how are we using them? Why are we using them the way we're? So I'm not against tools, obviously I'm using this. But what's missing is what are the concepts and strategies behind them? So a concept represents an abstract idea as well as fundamental building blocks of thoughts and beliefs. Strategies are how do we deploy it? And so at Rocketdyne, the strategy was for the first year, my boss, the VP of Ops, made it mandatory for 800 people in operations to go through a 9-hour course called Understanding Variation. And then, so everyone in operations went through, and I also got him to train his staff and his directors. The original plan was that he would train his director, the VP, Jim Albaugh, would train the directors, and each of them would train their staffs. And after watching Jim do it, and in fact, and Jim gave me the goal at the beginning of the year, by the end of the year. And it's like June, and the end of the year is like, 3 months away, whatever it was, something like that. And I said, somebody said, if you want to get Jim off the dime, give him a date for the first class. So I gave him a date for the first class. It was like 2 months out or a month out. And he says, let's go. I said, you've not taken the class yet. He said, well, write me a script. So I went home and wrote him a script for a 9-hour seminar. And I sat in the back of the room with friends. I said, I know what he's going to say next. And he read the script. And I thought the script would be useful for his directors. And there were 2 projectors, and the script included where to put each view graph, and all those details are in there, all the stage directions. So he does part 1, and then a month later, part 2, because I needed time to write the script for part 2. Then afterwards, I go to his office, and he says, and this is a guy who went on to become CEO of Boeing Defense and CEO of Boeing Commercial, a sharp guy. So after this after the second session, he says, how'd you think it went? I said, not too bad. He says, you know when I wiped the script? I said, when? He says, as I was crossing the street. I said, it showed. But he was gifted on his feet. But the strategy, that was the strategy. When I was hired nearly 4 years ago by Blue Origin, right, Jeff's company, brought in by Rocketdyne people, the strategy was different. It was not mass training. It was give me a bunch of people and they would go through 9 hours and then I would meet with them every other week. Actually, the original group I met with every Tuesday morning at 8:00 for 3 years. It was a different strategy, but we had a strategy. And so Akoff would say tools and techniques offer efficiency, doing things faster, cheaper. Effectiveness is getting into, I mean, Russ would differentiate, say efficiency is doing things well. Effectiveness is asking, was it worth doing in the first place? And so this is how I differentiate, because, you know, Six Sigma quality has a lot of tools and techniques, but the concepts are radically different than what Dr. Deming's talking about. But people get confused and say, well, the tools are the same, but the concepts are different. And then you can have a feedback loop. Better has no finish line. Born better. So better's in our nature is what we do. So I live this billboard. In the late 60s, Frank Pipp, who worked at Ford at the time, he was an assembly plant manager at Ford. He instructed his team to buy competitors' cars. I, for some reason, did a search for Frank Pipp, found out he passed away maybe 7, 8 years ago in his 90s. And I know a guy in San Diego, a mentor of Tim and I, Barry Bepp, who spoke at In2 Farm. And I thought, shoot, through Barry, I could have met this guy. Unfortunately, I didn't. And asked him what, because what was fascinating about him is that he knew that within Ford, whenever they assembled cars, rubber mallets were used to bang together most of the mating parts. And every once in a while, two parts went together without a mallet. And the Ford plant called that snap fit, no mallet needed. And so he had his team buy competitors' cars just to take them apart and see how they assembled. And they assembled just like Ford's. Right. And so I would ask him is, I mean, that's a lot of insight for the 60s to see how things assemble. And then everything was going well to the late 60s. They bought a car made by a new company and it assembled without mallets. He didn't believe the results. So he had the assembly team take it apart a second time and put it together a second time. And when it assembled without mallets, he thought they were hallucinating. Upon it assembling twice without mallets, he called up senior people from Ford who came out to visit. And the senior most person who came out to visit met the assembly team and they're all set to go, you know, hearing all the results firsthand. And this person says to the assembly team, the customer will never notice the difference. And Pipp was so pissed off, he quit and went to work for Xerox, where he would have been a peer at Barry Bepp, who's now in San Diego. And this is in a book written by David Kearns, who was Barry's boss for many years at Xerox. Said, I recall vividly an anecdote Frank told me occurred while I was running a Ford assembly plant. Ford didn't believe you can assemble a car without mallets. The rest of the parts were snap fit. When Pipp's crew got done taking apart the Toyota pickup truck, they were speechless. They hadn't once needed to pick up a mallet. The truck was entirely snap fit. They'd never seen anything like it. Well, people who focus on tools can't explain this. To his amazement, 100% snap fit. The customer will never notice. All right, red bead experiment. I think that's a big.
We know that the space shuttle main engine was assembled with mallets as well.
Some of that was by design.
Yeah.
No, meaning that there were parts that were put together. You cool one, you heat the other. That's that's a little bit different. No, but a lot of what we did was hammers.
I remember walking into the final assembly area and they had a whole wall with different sizes and weights of mallets coming out of mass production of consumer product where we would never think of that.
And
It was astonishing to me.
what then remind me, when did you leave Rocketdyne?
94.
Okay, so what I'll show you is real life snap fit results that happened after you left.
Sure, I left.
After you left.
Because they did all the good stuff.
Well, the good stuff happened when Jim became my boss. All right, so the red bead experiment. Now, this is not the executive version that all of you have, of course. Okay. And so there's a bowl here that Dale borrows how many times a year? Once a year?
At least 3 or 4.
Okay. And so in here is a bag with a couple thousand beads. I think 1,000 red, 4,000 white. And
Maybe, depending on how many I pull off for the last.
you don't return them all?
Almost guarantee I lose a couple every time.
I've got a skill. I'm going to start measuring. So the experiment is you take the beads, you pour them from one container into the other, then back. That's a mixing process. And then take this paddle with 50 holes and put it in, shake it around, take it out. And then go to inspector, and the inspector would count how many red beads and then record the results. And then we're not going to do a demonstration. There is. So Deming would have 4 willing workers, actually 6 willing workers come up on stage. These are results out of New Economics. And so the 6 of them volunteers would go through, and you get, after day 1, they all go through, and you get a set of results. And then the prevailing system, we praise David. We talk to Larry about an incentive plan. And then we do it again. And David's now napping. Spencer's goofing off. Larry got the message. It went from 12 to 7. And then again, David, our star performer, is now at 11 and 12. All right. Do you know how long it takes to do this demonstration? I've done it. I've only done it twice, maybe 3 times. I don't like the red bead experiment for reasons we'll get into. But to go through 6 people, that's an hour. And so when Chuck and I have done that, Chuck Boone and I, and you need a good sidekick because there's a really dry to go through all that. And even the Deming video library of it doesn't show you the whole hour. They shorten it. So to me, I think it's a long way to go. And so when Deming people say, well, what do you do instead? I said, I can shortcut this in a fraction of the time. But it is cool to do sometimes. And people are still buying it. So this is.
That's right. We're doing it pretty often in Tallahassee. And we immediately figured out we had short. We got it down to around 30 minutes. And by reducing by 1 or 2 the number of people that were
Oh yeah,
we got it down to 5, and then some people were doing an entire week, and we got that down to 5 days. And by doing that, and of course not letting them lollygag around,
yeah.
we could keep it going. And I will add this note, and that is I've probably done it 50, 60 times. And the very first people in the room, they'll typically have 30 people in the room. The very first people in the room that the light goes on are the workers.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And the bosses are going, I don't get it.
Oh yeah.
And so sometimes they do. But that was one of the big lessons, is that the people that are in there working in the system, well, that's what's happening in my job.
Oh yeah. Now what
Oh,
what I've done is instead of hanging slogans on the wall, I got these full-length aprons, and I have willing worker 1, willing worker 2, and then put the slogans on the aprons. And Todd Beckett, 2 years ago, Todd Beckett was one of the willing workers, and after the second one, some beads dropped on the floor, and I threatened them all. I said, "One more bead drops, you get fired." So Todd dropped the bead, and I fired him on the spot.
You know, for-
I think he did. That's Todd. And then, and the other thing I did is I introduced incentives, and on the last round, and the incentive was $20. And so in the last round, 2 of them drew the same number of beads, right? So I ripped the $20 bill in half. Go figure it out. So that's how you get it moving. All right. So then you get all the results, summarize them, and you say, okay, they're the best. These 2 guys and gals we're going to get rid of. And then Deming has, again, the Deming Video Library publishes this. We'll go past that. And then what Deming would then do in a 4-day seminar is take all that data, plot it in time order, and instead of looking at 2 points in isolation, say, wait a minute, if you look at it in this way, not 2 points together, ups and looks, and the first one, and then it goes down, it goes up. And what he learned from Walter Schuhart what he learned from Schuhart back in the 30s is there's always going to be variation in the number of red beads. The only question is, how much variation is there? And then you can take this and calculate an average. You can put limits on it that come from the data. Again, this goes back to Walter Schuhart's work, a tool. And then you can say that all that variation is naturally occurring. It comes from how the beads are mixed. This is naturally occurring variation that Deming called predictable, stable, common causes. And so when I met him in 1990, Taguchi talks about variation, but he doesn't use terms like common cause and special cause. That's not that he's not aware of that, but he doesn't look at it that way. And then what's behind same is if you understand variation, these are the same, meaning they're not identical, but identical doesn't exist when you understand variation. That's what Shelby learned. All right. And then we can take that data from the past, create a theory that say, if we keep doing in the past, if we keep doing in the future what we did in the past, then the theory is it should fall within. And if it falls within, then we say that's what it does. And so instead of looking at the ups and downs and getting all alarmed and adjusting every time, which makes the variation worse, what Deming is saying is, this is what it does. So this data point is not cause for alarm. That data point is so far away from this group that it likely comes from a different system, not part of this system. And this is why I used to tell people at Blue Origin, this may be the set of results for Kent, and this may be results from Huntsville. It's 2 different systems because they have 2 different ways of doing something. So what the red beads represent. So I say to Allison, so what are the red beads in a classroom? Could be a broken window, projector doesn't work, screen doesn't come down, monitor doesn't work. How do we eliminate them? Well, don't buy them in the first place. What do the white beads represent? And then for Allison, I would say it could be a door that closes, a projector that works, air conditioning that works. So it's a binary system. The red beads are bad, defects. The white beads are things that are good. Now we get into agony, the last straw. Speaking of Allison, that's her artwork. And I think she was in 4th grade at the time. She also made, I don't know if I told you, I had her create a cat chasing its tail.
oh,
So That's what organizations are like. They're cats chasing their tail and biting their tail, not realizing it's your tail you're biting. And so here she wrote, which straw broke the camel's back. And I, yeah, and then I would explain to people, there are organizations that focus on that last straw. It could be, who scored the winning goal, the winning run, and we give that person all the credit. Or if they miss the field goal, then we blame them for losing the game. So the idea of looking at those things in isolation. And so then I would have people imagine visiting an organization where I call the last straw organization, where people get fixated on that last straw. And imagine they spent a couple of weeks in this organization studying the physical environment, studying the people. Then imagine they recently visited an all straw organization where people think about all the straws. And then if you spent 2 weeks in each organization and then spent the first week with no people in either organization, just focus on the physical, what would you see in both organizations? If all you knew that this was a last straw mindset fixation and the other organization is all straw, but imagine visiting each organization for a week and there's no one there because they're closed. Then imagine visiting them in a week when they're there. And so this idea of a trip report goes back to 1998, a little bit different than this. But I would ask people, what are you going to see in those environments? And now over here, they would say unorganized, not well-maintained individual departments, slogans, someone always looking over their shoulder, dictatorial, unattentive, back here, empty slogans. And the all-star organization, no walls, well lit, yoga class scheduled, daycare on site, on the floor management, enjoy working, highly motivated. So some of you have seen this as, this side is red pen company, that side is blue pen company. I did the trip report for a group of about a dozen captains of fishing boats in New Zealand pre-pandemic. And these are people that get on a fishing boat owned by this other guy, go offshore 200 miles for 2 weeks on a boat with maybe 4 or 5 people, capture all this stuff, and then come back in. And so my partner in Wellington was doing safety training for this group. So on one visit, I met the guy that ran the company. Then on the next visit, we're going to go expose them to this type of thinking. And we show up, and it was the same day that government auditors showed up with a new set of regulations on how they're going to weigh the fish and all that. And this company got fined the year before $7 million for underreporting. Imagine that, right? So the government regulators are there. They showed up the same time I did with my partner. And my partner says, do you want to speak before the regulators or after the regulators? I said, let the regulators go first. Because they're like, all right, what are the new rules? And as they're doing that, I'm thinking of, how do I do the trip report with a bunch of captains that are being this, right? I'm going to talk about red pens and blue pens. They'll throw me out of the room. We're going to talk about this. No, that ain't going to work either. So I started talking about synergy, positive synergy, negative synergy. One organization is all about positive synergies. One's all about negative synergy. And they started to loosen up and got results just like this. So it was a different starting point. And the good news is I had an hour to figure it out. But it's all the same results, all the same results. So depending on the audience, there's different ways of doing this. Then I would ask them, what % of organizations are last straw versus all straw? People say the majority. And so I said to Jim Albaugh once when he was VP at Rocketdyne, I said, Jim, what keeps us in business? He said, what? I said, lousy competition. He says, you're right. And so this is also known as me and we organizations. And so going back to this model, right? Me organizations are all about tools and techniques and don't realize that their concept is managing parts. They're not aware of that concept because they don't think about their thinking. And now beyond the red beads. So this is what happened after you left. All right, so we went beyond Phil Crosby, traditional zero defect, another way of saying doing things right the first time, qualities, conformist requirements. This question I asked at a Rocketdyne class once, and there are 3 or 4 people in there. One was Greg White, who was a quality inspector. And I said to the group, I said, because Greg came in, he's complaining about, I spent all day dispositioning bad parts, blah, 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 blah. So I said, well, Greg, what would happen if you came in tomorrow morning and there were no such things? Everything met requirements. He says, Bill, I wouldn't have a job. I said, what else? And he's like, the quality organization doesn't need to exist. So that's where this comes from is, if all the beads are white, what do you do? What do you do? Imagine what changes would begin to occur day by day, hour to hour. And so that started with Greg's comment about spent all day yesterday dispositioning bad parts. And then, so this is what I ask graduate students, is if everything meets requirements, can you continue? I mean, Deming's point 5 was he continually improve. I said, well, can you continually improve after all the beads are white? And when I worked for the Deming Institute, Kelly Allen would do the red bead experiment, plot all the results. Then I would get up as the other instructor for the 2.5-day program. And I'd ask, 100 people, if all the beads are white, are we done? Is that what Deming is saying? Well, no, you can continually improve. I said, how? They said, well, you can make them faster, you can make them cheaper. I said, okay, what about quality? Can you continue and improve? I said, yeah, you can make them faster, make them cheaper. I said, no, what about quality? Yeah, you can continually improve. I said, they couldn't answer that question. And so if I'm going to present the red bead experiment, I'll talk about this question, which most people in the Deming community don't get to. Because I got exposed to Dr. Taguchi first. In fact, when Gypsy Rani was a mentor for many years, she saw my biography, and it said that I introduced Dr. Deming's ideas into Dr. Taguchi's design system. And Gypsy says, in her Tennessee drawl, she said, Beal, wasn't it the other way around? I said, Gypsy, depends on your starting point. And my starting point was Taguchi. So the acceptability question is, has the requirement been met? There's only 2 answers to that question, yes or no. Missing from this is the variation question. How many ways are there to meet one specific requirement? So I once said, and Scott Olson was there. Not many of you know Scott. Bonnie Harkins was there. Many of you know Bonnie. This is the first time I met Bonnie. I was at the Camarillo Public Library doing a session. And I said, there's an infinite number of ways of meeting a set of requirements. And the guy says, infinite? I said 453. So what he's talking about, Crosby's talking about, is managing actions. And it's like Alan said, my requirement is met. Lori says, my requirement is met. What Dr. Deming's talking about is a product or service possesses quality that helps somebody and enjoys a good and sustainable market. So my explanation here is, it's one thing for me to say this is a good lecture because I followed all the instructions. What Deming is talking about is asking the receiver how well it was received. So it's not me passing the ball to Sonia and saying the pass was good when it left my hands. It's asking how easy was it? How easy was it for Sonia to catch? That you have to stretch this way or that way. So most quality systems are measuring quality from the point of view of the producer. And so when Pratt bought Rocketdyne, we had to go through all this mandatory training. And one of the seminars, they were talking about quality in the environment. And somebody said, well, what do you mean about quality environment? And somebody raised their hand, and I guess it was an employee. And he says, I used to work for Boeing in Australia. We made these big parts for Boeing Commercial Airplane Group. And he said, there's this really long part, and there's one particular dimension. If we measured that in the middle of the day when it's hot, it's going to be too long. So we measured it first thing in the morning. And that's an example of quality in the environment. I'm thinking, tell me you care about how that part is used. Tell me you care. That's so where Deming's coming from is Akoff is it's how well was, it's not each of us meeting requirements. in an infinite number of ways without paying attention to the others. It's saying how I meet requirements depends upon others. We do that at home all the time when we own all the other elements. And then we go to work, say at home, we are the integrator and we understand the relationships. When we go to work, we're either at the end of the line putting it together with hammers or upstream of that. And so as we go from home to work, we become a different person. And that's why, this is one guy at Rocketdyne that we hired from a supplier. He's a freaking idiot. And he says, "Oh, you're where you're coming from. You're beyond us." And I showed him, a piece of wood where Wilson had drawn a line. We cut to the line, as opposed to anywhere in between. I said, don't make this complicated. I said, you may tell me the system doesn't do that, but don't tell me this is hard to understand. And that's what I used to tell the managers at Blue Origin, people at Blue Origin. I said, your idea is to explain it to people in a way that they grasp what it's about. I said, don't let them tell you they don't understand. They can tell you Blue Origin's system doesn't do it that way. And then you say, well, what do we do about that? But literally, I had people at Rocketdyne trying to say, well, Bill, this is complicated. It's like, stop it already. And this one guy was so pissed off at me. He went to his director, John Turner. And John Turner was brought into Rocketdyne by Jim Albaugh. But at this point, Jim was president. So John Turner comes out to me and he says, you really got Rich pissed off at you about some of the things you're doing. And he's talking about going to the gym. I said, I'll pay for the limo and I'll buy lunch. Because of this thing we're going to look at next. So we go bowling as a family with a high school swim team years ago. And there's Monica's bowling ball and bowling bag. And then walk down the hallway. This is Allison's freshman year. And there's the bowling ball at the entrance of the master bedroom. So I went to Monica and I said, why's your bowling ball there? She literally said, I asked Wilson to put it away. So I called Wilson over. I said, why is it there? And he said, Mom said, put it in the bedroom. And let me tell you, Allison knows this story is about him. So if you ask her about the bowling ball, that was Wilson. So I don't have a corresponding story about her. Her stories are really, artwork and things like that. But if you ask Amy, Wilson's fiance, about the bowling balls, you're like, oh yeah. He's famous for that. Now, if my mother was alive, she'd tell me, you did the same thing. I said, okay, fine. Maybe I did.
What's wrong with what you did?
What's that?
There's nothing wrong with what you did.
Oh, no, not at all. Like I said, I'm willing to bet there were times when my mother said, pick up your socks and pick up your sister's. I'm not picking up her socks. She can pick up her socks, right? So those are all white beads. They're all good. But then those are red beads. They're bad. Cross that line. In fact, this spring's graduate class at Cal State Northridge, in a live lecture, I said, how wide is the 45th parallel that separates Canada from the United States? And they're like, length. No. How? And I called on them. I said, how wide is the line? And the first person was like, length? I said, no, how wide is the line? I called on the second person, confused. Finally called on the third person. She says, 0? I said, yeah. I said, how wide is the line that separates a ball from a strike in baseball? She said, 0? I said, how wide is the line that separates a good part from a bad part? She says, 0? I said, yeah. It's across that line. It goes from good to bad. Right? Balls and strikes. So most quality systems don't, including Blue Origin's, doesn't separate. Blue Origin's quality system can't tell you where the ball is in the strike. Actually, they collect that data, but it's buried in the system. But that's not what they track. It says balls and strikes, balls and strikes. All right. What Deming's talking about, that he learned from Dr. Taguchi, is where is the ball in the strike zone? And you don't get to be a professional pitcher without knowing that. Now, there may be batters for which it doesn't matter, but there may be batters like Shohei where it does matter. So what if instead of looking at the size and all the white beads as being the same, we understand they have different diameters, different weights, different shades of white, and there could be requirements that they meet, but the variation, there's going to be variation in the white beads. And I find is there's not many people I've met in the Deming community that talk about white bead variation, but they didn't spend as much time with Dr. T as I did. And so here's what we did at Rocketdyne beginning in the mid 90s. So a couple thousand people went through this course in variation. We got a huge contract, developed this engine. The engine's now out of production. So it's 18 feet tall. 3 of them went on the heavy lift vehicle called Delta 4 Heavy. I think the last flight was maybe 3 years ago. And the main combustion chamber is way up there. The main combustion chamber includes a plate. Felix Delgado, who was here 2 years ago and passed away a year ago in March, he designed the main combustion chamber with this appreciation. So the injector plate, well, I can't show you exactly what it looks like, but think of it as a round plate, maybe half an inch thick. And Felix designed it to have 628 holes, an outer ring, another ring, another ring, another ring. And the holes are roughly 3/8 of an inch in diameter. And if you take a cross section, you'll see the hole, the holes. And then what Felix had in mind is he put a coaxial tube in each one. And coaxial means there's a tube within a tube. And so through the center one is liquid hydrogen, between the annulus is liquid oxygen. And it's important that the fuel and the oxidizer don't mix until here, because that's where the flames happen. So you don't want the mixing happening here. So this joint has to be, you don't want a gap there. So those are brazed together. And a friend at Rocketdyne she says, well, Bill, you can explain brazing. She said, brazing's like the cheese in a grilled cheese sandwich. And so the braised alloy, the cheese is here. And you put all the tubes in, you put it into the furnace, the cheese melts, and then you get a fillet on the top and the bottom for $15,000. And you need to get every fillet top and bottom so you don't have a leakage path. And the problem was prior to 1996, when you left, the best we ever did is, no, I'm just telling you.
You could only solve it after she left.
Oh, there it is. We'll talk about that later. Yeah. But the best we ever did was 85%, the worst case. So Felix and Mike Malenzak, the manufacturing guy, were told, we can't do it this way. It'll never work. Because we're going to have to braze it again and again and again. And that's $15,000 each. But here's the issue. Prior to 1996, when Diane left, all the holes were machined on the low side because you can always make them larger. That's the bowling ball in the doorway. And then the outer diameters are made to the high side, the outer diameters of the tubes. The idea is if you make the hole as small as possible, you can always make it larger. And if you make the outer diameter as large as possible, you can always make it smaller. And that's each of them being protective of their own piece, right, Thomas? And so then the question becomes, which of these two groups owns the gap? Nobody. So what Felix and Mike Malenzak, so Felix was the designer, Mike Malenzak, who I worked closely with at Blue Origin for nearly 4 years, they became aware of this, and they went off and ran experiments of putting tubes in plates and found out what the ideal gap was that no one ever paid attention to. They then did machining studies and figured out how to get the right distribution and how to align them, right? So they paid attention to the clearance that no one else ever thought to do. And I've talked about, so I can talk about this publicly because Tim and I and Joe Onstadt, Joe can't be here this year, we presented this for the first time in 2000 at the largest annual Deming conference called Ohio Quality and Productivity Forum. And it was at the end of that forum when they said, this is the last year we're doing it, in which case Dan Robertson and I, who talked about doing our own event, looked at each other and said, that's our cue. And so Joe Onstadt filled out the paperwork. We got permission to present this. I've presented this to thousands of people around the world and never had anybody come up to me and say, that's what we do where I work. Although there's one guy at Blue Origin who worked for an automotive supplier, and he said he was aware in special situations. That's one person. You know, what they're always doing is minding the parts. And so
we're doing that at Gillette.
what's that?
We were doing that at Gillette for the clearance between a
Oh.
ballpoint and the machine rim of the ballpoint.
Not getting enough credit. No, I mean the word's not out there. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So we got everything to braze in one cycle. The left-hand side is minding the part. The right-hand side is minding the gap. And so the aim of this comes from the new economics. The prevailing system must undergo transformation. The aim of the chapter is provide an outside view. And relative to curiosity, you find at a lost organization, there's little curiosity on what can be done. It's beaten out of people. And even if they have curiosity, they're told by senior people, as Mike and Felix were told, can't be done, can't be done, can't be done. And what saved my career at Rocketdyne was Felix and Mike went off, put this into practice, and Jim loved it. And there was a manufacturing guy who followed the hardware, and every time a unit would braze, I would see him. And I finally said to him, I said, here's what I want you to do. Send me an email every time a unit brazes. Just send it to me. So what are you going to do with it? I said, just send it to me. Bill, unit number 5 is brazed in one cycle. Unit number 6 is brazed in one cycle. Number 7 is brazed in one cycle. And on one of them, he wrote, he said, we can do this over and over till the cows come home. So all I would do is forward that to Jim Albaugh, FYI. That's all I said. And with that, Jim tolerated me for many years. Once the individual understands the system, he can apply it in every kind of relationship. The lay of profound knowledge. And so this is what I guess Tim talked about yesterday, appreciation of the system, knowledge about variation, theory of knowledge, psychology, all the things we can do together. How are we doing on time? It's
10:15.
Okay. So Laura, you start around 10:30-ish. Yeah.
There we go.
All right. Any questions? Well, thank you for coming. Okay. So let me.
I did have one question.